is doing what we want them to be doing. Our objective is, so we still don't quite know what it means to have lawyers hacking. But it's an evolving concept. I'm hopeful that we will learn better within the next many sessions this afternoon. And I want to introduce Nick Merrill. I think I met Nick maybe a year and a half ago, like 2 years ago at Personal Democracy Forum. And to me, I looked at Nick and thought, this is the sort of the poster child of everything I want me and my students to be working on. This is not a secret anymore to the world, but Nick was John Doe in John Doe v. Ashcroft. He was had to remain silent and anonymous for several years, but now he's allowed to talk about that. So champions many of us in the room. Nick now, he's run an ISP for many years. He is now embarking on trying to create a new model for a telecom company, a not-for-profit, user-empowered, privacy-sanctifying, socially responsible telecom network. I don't know if it's viable. He's had me and the students try to do some research on the extent to which that's a reasonable model to take on the big telecom companies. I'm hopeful it is. Yeah. So that's it. I'm going to hand it over to Nick to run the rest of this session. And the goal is to be interactive, engage, and do whatever you think comes to mind when you think of legal hacking.
All right. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I don't know what to do with this time, but I'll wing it. Let's get here. Hopefully you can hear me. So thank you everyone for coming today. I wanted to speak with you about an idea that is not my idea, but an idea that I'm kind of enamored with. And the idea is supposed to address sort of an issue there is with privacy policies. There was a study at Carnegie Mellon done by some researchers there, which looked at the average person who uses the internet and the number of privacy policies that they encounter on an annual basis. And it basically concluded that the average person, if they were to sit there and read from the beginning to the end all the privacy policies, it would take them something like 79 days out of the year. And that's a sort of assuming, I guess, that they can really understand the legalese, which in terms of the average person probably isn't the case. So I started to talk to friends of mine. I've, at this point in my life, a lot of friends who are attorneys. And some of them are really brilliant attorneys. Most of them, almost all of them, are very brilliant attorneys. And I asked them, do you actually read the privacy policies? And they said, no, we just click OK. I mean, I'm sure there are certain cases in which you are more careful than others, but when you're putting your photos on Flickr, or when you're going on Facebook, or you're signing up for Gmail, or when your iPhone version changes and you have this like 80-page thing to read, no one has time to read it. So the idea that I wanted to discuss today is the idea to sort of take the model of Creative Commons in terms of that the GPL, the GNU Public License, is a very long legalese document. But Creative Commons took that concept and they changed it and sort of boiled it down so that it could be displayed in the form of icons. So you can quickly look at a number of little graphic logos on a page and know what the basic terms of the licensing agreement for the content on that page is. And I thought that it would be interesting to discuss at this hackathon the concept of trying to take the standard clauses of a typical privacy policy and try to boil it down so that it can be shown in an iconified form. But then, because I'm who I am, I kind of thought that it would be interesting to look at some different clauses and different policies that might be interesting to implement that aren't the typical ones in a privacy policy. Some of the basic stuff that you would see probably in everyone's privacy policy would be something that would address things like you give them data and then what are they going to do with the data, or what is their right, or who owns the data. But I wanted to kind of look at other things such as what would the provider, the software as a service vendor, or whoever it is that we're talking about, what would they do if they were asked by a third party to give the data away, either as part of a legal process or outside of a legal process? I also thought it would be interesting to talk about the types of security protocols that are used, because there's been a lot of stuff in the news in the past few years over organizations that possess private data belonging to a lot of people. Like, for instance, there's a clearinghouse that deals with all Visa and MasterCard transactions that recently got hacked. I barely followed the story, but all of a sudden my bank sent me, my company, my wife, and like every credit card I have, I got new ones. Because they're like, well, we think your stuff is compromised. So there's really no standard for how people treat data. Even when it's really, there are some, there's PCI compliance, there's HIPAA, there are a few standards for certain types of industries, but as a whole, there is no real standard for how personal data is treated. And I thought that would be another interesting angle to look at in terms of a privacy policy. There is an organization out there called Rise Up. They are a collective that works with a lot of activist groups. Mainly what they do is they host mailing lists so that organizations can sort of communicate with their members or send out their message to a bunch of constituents. They host something like 15,000 mailing lists, I believe, and the number of people on those lists, I'm sure, goes well into the hundreds of thousands. Now, they're in the category of privacy, they would probably fall in like the top 1%. Like, some people would say they're extremist. I happen to fall in line with them. I agree with their point of view. And their privacy policy, I thought, is an interesting model to discuss because it's extremely absolutist. It says they will not give away users' information ever, period. Except in the context of a legal process. But even in that case, they affirm that they will do everything within their capability to resist giving away the information. So I've recently found out that there are some people working with Creative Commons and with Mozilla, and they're working on a project which is basically complete at this point. But what it's trying to do is to look at existing sites and sort of classify their existing privacy policies into this framework, and just looking at these standard types of things, like who owns the data, what are they going to do with the data. I thought, it would be maybe interesting for us to come up with ideas that go beyond these standard ideas, and then see if we could work within that organization. It's kind of being run by a group called Disconnect Me. They are all about empowering the user to control their own information. So I wanted to just kind of throw out this basic overview of what the idea is. And I don't really have a PowerPoint or a set of slides to show you about it. But I wanted this to be more of like a give and take and interactive session, since a lot of people here are either attorneys or law students. And I wanted to kind of just test the waters and see what kind of ideas we could come up with for a model privacy policy that would be going a lot further than what we traditionally see. So I don't know if anyone feels like throwing out some ideas, but that seemed like maybe a good place to start.
Hi. So for me, the idea of privacy seems very abstract. It seems to be a core value for a lot of people that I know, but I don't know what we really mean when we say we want to protect our privacy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when I hear, okay, so we can create policies that restrict what companies can do with our information, with our data, but I don't know, when I kind of gave that up a long time ago. What I'm actually more concerned about is what human beings do when they have individualized information. identifiable information about individuals. So it could be in a healthcare setting, it could be, I guess, in the workplace. That's just what I'm thinking about. And I'm not a lawyer, I'm an entrepreneur.
That actually makes me think of an idea that I've been tossing around in my head. I have a lot of like half-baked ideas around this area because I spent a lot of years when I was under this FBI gag order not being able to talk to anyone about it and just thinking about it to myself a lot. But an idea that occurred to me at some point was, why isn't there something like HIPAA for data? Not just medical data, but all kinds of data. Because HIPAA, when I've dealt with people in medicine, they take it very seriously because I think the penalties attached to it. But in the telecommunications world, we have the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, but it doesn't seem, it's a bit outdated. People are talking about the need to update it, and the fact that it doesn't really, since it's so old, it doesn't really address a lot of the scenarios that we see today. So yeah, that's something I've often thought about, but I've sort of chosen to go down this road of being a nonprofit, which means I can't really do like lobbying and stuff. But since you guys can, maybe someone will run with that idea. I don't know if anyone's working on that.
Two thoughts. One is, in the telecommunications world, a lot of companies make their privacy policy disclaimable. So so basically, if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else if you can. And people are kind of have no real choice in that matter. They, if they even bother to read the privacy policy, they just happen to go along. And at the same time, it's also kind of understandable why that is the case, because a lot, if not most of the profit that many of these companies make is from information sharing.
Absolutely.
And the second thought is actually about security. You can argue about, how much sharing is appropriate, but I don't think it's very disputable that security of information is something that everyone holds very important. And in the meantime, many companies find that kind of thing is just a matter of their own profit, and so they weigh the cost of making data more secure against the profit that they are going to lose by spending money on that. So I'm not sure how to address that, but for ISP, and that's definitely something that the ISPs should be taking into consideration, and I don't know what the legislation stand on that is, but that is something that's worth enforcing in more. That's something that everyone can agree to.
I mean, going back to when I first started my internet provider, it was like 1994, I remember being very attracted to it in the first place, because I remember feeling that the television part of the media and the radio part of the media were extremely regulated, controlled, and overseen by a whole bureaucracy. Whereas I remember feeling that the internet had none, and it was just like a Wild West kind of situation. And that was one of the things that attracted me to it in the first place. But now, after having sort of worked in this arena for many years, I started to see that it's a double-edged sword, and that it wasn't so important back then when nobody was using it for very much of anything. But now that it's become so central, not just in people's private lives, but particularly in political and civic life, now it's become like a huge deal. Like this whole thing with the revolution in Egypt and stuff really opened my eyes, and was like, I was already on this path of trying to do this new product, but that really blew my mind, like when they shut off the internet and when they stopped letting people SMS.
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, we have American law. We know that the FTC says, you have a privacy policy, just follow it. If you don't have one, too bad, don't bother. And what we have in Europe is we have a data protection directive which has specific requirements. And my question for you is, if you're going to be using a template and asking questions about retention and stuff, there's onward use and there's further, wouldn't you want to have an integrated template that says, if you're going to look to comply with the European model, you look at the source, the mapping of the source and the destination of the data, and then the compliance with the directive and maybe some of the statutes of the implementing within the countries. And then you can add that, you say, do you also want to comply with FTC? Do you also want to comply with HIPAA? And is it PHI or not? So from the standpoint of what you're offering, I think your structure would be best suited as a product. Say, I want to take my company global. I've got a little something here in Washington Square or whatever it is, and I want to take it global, so I want to know about my data. So what do I have to do to comply? And then I can have a better process. So my question is, what are you doing about that, and what have you thought about on that subject?
In some ways, that's a really fascinating idea, because that addresses business needs. But on the other hand, what kind of a Joe Sixpack understands what the European data requirements are and PCI compliance and HIPAA? I know that they all exist, but I couldn't tell you what the specs of them are. The only one that I've personally come into contact with is PCI compliance for e-commerce, just in jobs that I've done. And I have some vague sense of HIPAA, but I don't even know what type of an attorney would even be familiar with all of that material. So it almost feels like going in the opposite direction of becoming more voluminous in terms of the amount of knowledge one would need to know what they're getting into. But it's going in a much better direction in terms of business usability and having a real business purpose. I guess I had thought of this as a tool for the consumer or the user of web services, just to know what they were getting into. Just on this idea that people literally aren't reading the agreements and they're just clicking OK to everything. And so I've seen people as jokes put bizarre clauses in the contracts, like, and you will give us your firstborn child. They stick it in there as a joke, but then people are clicking OK. So it's funny, but it's weird. I guess I don't know. I don't really have a good coherent answer to your question, but in part because I don't know that much about all the different standards, and I'm not even an attorney. I'm just some guy, really. Sir?
I just wanted to second what the gentleman said, because the EU Data Privacy Directive happens to be quite detailed on the one hand, which is problematic for you, but quite pro-consumer and quite pro-user on the other hand. So you've got, in a sense, my remarks capture what this gentleman said and what the young lady over there said. You've got two issues. Number one, you want to talk about creating the type of policy that either can be adopted or serve as a model for adoption. And then the other issue that you have is actually getting buy-in either from other ISPs or other people who might be using it. The first part, I guess, is relatively easy to do. You can go ahead and create what you wish, especially if you're starting from a proper base. And you can even create something, and just to kind of riff a little bit upon the Creative Commons thing. In Creative Commons, yes, you're right, you do have little icons, but the icons actually are simply icons that stand for an actual license agreement, which runs several pages.
Yes.
So you might be doing the same sort of thing, but you would still need to have that real policy, the staff.
Oh yeah, it has to be backed up with an actual contract.
But the other thing is, and discussing this with HIPAA, made me think that the problem with HIPAA is the cost of compliance. And you hear this whining from the medical, you've heard this whining from the medical community and also from the HMOs about the cost of HIPAA compliance because of the sorts of things that you specifically want to address. That's great, but recognize there's going to be a price to be paid for this, and someone's going to have to pay that price. Maybe, perhaps, you can offer an alternative model that you could create that is going to be so compelling and is going to create capture so much mind share that you'll be able to turn things over that way. But if you effectively have to put it on top of an existing infrastructure, it's going to cost, and there'll be resistance.
That's one of the concerns that I really do have, is that because of my particular bias, which I obviously don't deny, I'm thinking more of the rights of the individual. But I also have spent a lot of my life in business, so I understand that if it's not attractive to the businesses, then they're not going to adopt it. And I'm not suggesting any kind of legislation to force it. That's why I use Creative Commons as a model. It's a take it or leave it kind of a thing. No one has to use it. It's only useful if it's useful and attractive. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I kind of come more from your perspective, because I'm not a lawyer, nor do I have a legal background, but, you know, it hit me, I guess, in the 90s at some point, running TCP dump and watching Calyx packets going in and out and going, what is that? Why are they talking to this network? And, you know, and that kind of threw me upside down, but, and I also don't have a tolerance for reading long things, so I can't even go through the GPL, frankly, public license. But from your perspective, as someone who actually went through what was a legally ordained measure, you know, and I do remember very, very well over the period of time, and been around the scene, I'll say, for a bit. But what would it have done for you having better privacy policies? Because that's, and let me just ask the second half of that, because to me, fundamentally, privacy policies are kind of the flip side of do not track, you know? Please don't steal from me. I promise I won't, or kind of not steal from you.
Yeah.
And to me, you gotta look at, like, say, the model that the core people do, which is very much by design. You're not trusting anybody. You know, have your subpoenas, have your corrupt governments, have your inside data breaches, but there's nothing to take, because you're designing a network, and I also do co-location too, so it's, you're designing a network which, even if someone, you know, there were subpoenas, there was, you know, the corrupt government, the whatever going on, it wouldn't matter. Have our data, we don't have anything. You know, you could, you know, collect and, you know, crash every node and grab all the data, and it wouldn't matter. End of the day, doing it by design as opposed to policy, to me, is gotta be the way to do it, which is actually why I'm here today. I definitely want to hear more about that.
Sure. I guess if there's time, I'll talk about it. I just want to kind of flesh this out a little bit, but I'll definitely try to fit it in. Although we have a very short amount of time in total. You had a comment?
Yeah, I was wondering, what if you made the information has value and from the get-go?
Yes.
So what if you made each piece of a person's information have a specific value? That way, if a company wanted that information, they would have to pay for it. And if they accessed information for which they had not paid, which of course the user would be the one getting paid for the access to their information. So if a company accessed information that they hadn't paid for, that essentially becomes theft. So it's in their interest, in a way, to not access specific information they haven't paid for, and the user has recourse.
Yeah.
And the user has an interest in the flow, is more likely to participate in and pay attention to the privacy policy because it has value for them. Right now, it seems that part of the issue is that nobody takes them seriously enough.
It's a super interesting idea, and maybe in a way that would be super enlightening for people, because I don't think a lot of people understand that their data is worth money and what's going on with it and how it's being collated, collected, bundled, and resold. So in a way, I think that would really be an eye-opener for people. Although I would start to wonder that if you put this economic incentive on giving away your information, that would just sort of build into the problem.
If I can
But that's just the first thought off my head.
If I can follow up,
Please.
It's already happening.
Yes.
I mean, people are already making money off our information.
Sure, yeah.
It seems just kind of horrifying that we as individuals are not the ones doing so, because it's happening already.
Yeah. You, sir? Yeah, you.
I was just going to say a couple of things. First, you talked about HIPAA earlier and cost of compliance. See the benefit of not having a regulation in place. You almost get to act as a legislator of one in terms of, like, why do people care about HIPAA? Because there's penalties in place. Well, if you could imagine, as a consumer advocate legislator of one, writing HIPAA, but as it relates to you, what would the statute that you would put in place, and then use that as your baseline for what you're actually trying to build? And then my second comment would be that what you just said. I think I kind of agree with your response, is that I think what you're trying to build is an ISP for people who don't want to alienate their privacy in the marketplace. Talking about data that has value, it's not necessarily an economic value or It's not information that one wants to have as something with economic value. Property rights regime can protect that interest, but it's not meant to alienate itself in the marketplace. So I would agree with you that I approach from that standpoint as opposed to enabling consumers to alienate. That's being developed already by a number of people.
Yeah, I think I've heard of business models that work like that, where you are actively giving up your information in exchange for some type of compensation.
Yeah, I mean, it's still in the works, but a lot of people are working on that business model as to how do you actually put a valuation on certain information.
I was talking to people from the Wall Street Journal at this other conference earlier this weekend, and they were telling me about a model in which you have to answer some like marketing questionnaire stuff in order to get access, rather than have to pay money to get through the paywall to read a paper. And that seemed kind of interesting, I guess. I mean, because I will not read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. Anyone wants me to pay. It's like, okay, see ya. I'm willing to give it up. But maybe an alternative thing, it depends on what kind of stuff they would be asking. If it was something really personal, maybe not. They were like, do you like, this brand or that brand? Maybe I would answer that, but that seems sort of just so irrelevant, not personal, but let's see that.
I'm a librarian and I work with sort of user data all the time, and we have a sort of a very strong guiding value statement about how we sort of think about privacy, and that's all sort of connected to things like our accreditation. I also work in education, so I'm sort of guided also by FERPA, and I have to sort of pass all kinds of tests if I intend to sort of collect any information about any human subjects. So I think, at least the model that I'm used to, the onus is on the data collector to be responsible with that data. It's not that that data isn't useful, or it's not in some way a commodity, or it doesn't in some way drive our engines. But, we can still work with that and not have it attached to an identified individual. And I think to some extent, that's sort of the dream, but that works about as well as that's going to be attached to any kind of outside enforcement or oversight. So I think that you can sort of draft a really, really dreamy policy, but until that's sort of connected to some kind of accreditation or some kind of ability to keep on going with your data collection, I think people are going to find it very optional, and that's something that I kind of wonder about.
Absolutely. I mean, like, Creative Commons is not backed by, no one has to use it. I don't know how exactly they managed to get all these different entities, like, Flickr or whatever, to adopt it. But I guess a lot of it is that you can't completely focus on the rights of the individual, but you also have to think about what's attractive and what would be beneficial to businesses in order that they would want to use it.
I mean, I think one of the things that makes Creative Commons work really well is that it's adaptable. It's not all sort of take or leave it. I mean, you can sort of put yourself in the Creative Commons spectrum according to where you're comfortable sort of sharing or participating. And I think that there's a lot of room for that, everywhere. So you can have this great tool, but we need to know a little bit more about how you use it in order for it to work. And I think that it's transparent and flexible at the same time, and I think that most of the privacy policies that people see and use are not transparent or flexible sort of on either end. So it's thinking about how to make it malleable, I guess, or useful to as many people as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you. You, sir.
Well, back on the comment about controlling information, there is also, instead of selling your information, there is Project BRM at Harvard's Berkman Center that's trying to give people control of the information. So rather than companies compiling databases about people, each person owns their database and then gives rights to companies.
Is that Doc Searles?
That is Doc Searles,
okay.
Yeah. That's a great project.
Yeah.
Did you have any specific provisions of a model privacy policy that you wanted to suggest icons for?
No, not exactly. I have something that. Are you controlling this thing? This is no. I'm saying. Oh,
you
this
could
is
just
this?
use it with a
I
computer.
didn't know. Oh, that's your personal machine. Okay. I have a thing which I can give you, which you can put up there, which is from this group that's been hacking on this at the Wall Street Journal Hackathon. And I'm just trying to find the URL here.
So, since
Yes.
this is the one New York City-based, privacy-focused ISP that I know of. They're under you, and they're doing this one. But I thought you had their
Oh, anyway.
Yeah, they own on purpose.
Yes, I know. I've heard.
It looks like the other presentations are ending, so if you could maybe make some last remarks.
Yeah. The site that we're going to put up on the screen right now is a model iconified privacy policy that was just hacked together this weekend at this Wall Street Journal hackathon, which was being held, or is still being held, over at NYU Law School. And it's a collaboration between mostly Mozilla and a group called Disconnect Me, and also people at Creative Commons, which kind of addresses some of these issues, but mostly it's looking at the standard type of clauses. And so they came up with a whole set of icons, which you can see here. And if you, they literally, I put all this pressure on them to put it up. Like, it wasn't live, but now it's up, so you can look at it. It was funny, I had never met these guys until just now, and I found out that they had already basically done what I came here to present today. So I wanted to show it to you. It's really great work. They did like a really amazing job. And I quickly realized that this was way better than anything that I would have been able to do. So I'm like proud of their work. It's really good. So yeah, it's like db.disconnect.me /icons. You can check out their work. I guess I could take like one last question.
So there's two pieces here. The first is these icons for privacy policies, and I took a look at them and they look pretty good, but we've also tried this before in the early 2000s with P3P. So I would encourage anyone who wanted to work on this not to repeat the same mistakes that we made before. Mm-hmm. But the other part is about data. So a mobile application on your phone can upload your entire contact database, and they have no incentive not to do so. Mm-hmm. So what I would really like to get is attach a liability for this information, so that if an organization, if a company doesn't need to collect this information, obviously that's different in case of HIPAA, but if it doesn't need to collect extra information, they don't want to, because they don't want to incur the extra liability. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I think that's going to require some sort of law, but yeah, that's what I'm really after.
Yeah. I guess that kind of goes back to this idea of like a HIPAA law for online. All right, well, I guess I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you very much for coming. Sorry for the abrupt ending, but the next thing is starting. So again, thank you everyone very much for coming.